Hello politicos, hello people of Earth, hello Jason Isaacs. We're back with the third video of the night on third way socialism. So how about that? Whoa, the irony. Right, so I think I said at the end of the last video that the critical thing to remember about third way socialism is that it is a reaction more to Thatcherite neoliberalism than it is to perhaps democratic socialism. Democratic socialism, basically the time was called on that in 1979. We then had 18 years of neoliberal Thatcherism to all intents and purposes. And so when the third way came around, it was in many ways, and I'll explain why, much more closely allied to to neoliberalism than it was to social democracy. In fact, what you can probably think of it as doing was seeking to drag neoliberal conservatism back towards social democracy rather than sort of being A to B. It was essentially trying to we've gone from A to C and then we're trying to reverse engineer our way back to B. It could be that really has just complicated things more than they should have done, but it's very late and I really need to get this done. So let's get on with it anyway. So third way socialism, what exactly is it? What does it mean? And how can I help you understand it? So as I said, we have to put this in context. Social democracy was dead in the water. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, and so there weren't any hardcore socialists left knocking around, and socialism generally was kind of discredited. Furthermore, we had the failure of the post-war mixed economies to deal with the crises of the 1970s. The 1970s, for various reasons, unleashed all sorts of nasty economic pandemonium on the country. Could anyone have dealt with it? Who knows? We're looking at long-term structural problems in the economy that came to a head in the 70s, aided and abetted by oil crises left, right, and the centre, and political crises across the world. It doesn't really matter whether or not any other system could have dealt with it more effectively. The fact of the matter was that the mixed economies, the sort of way in which social democracy had got to this point, and the traditional or one nation conservatism had got to pretty much the same point, albeit by a different route. They were both practicing the same sort of policies, the middle road, the middle way policies, and Butzkelism and all that sort of stuff. It couldn't deal with the problems that came through in the 1970s. That obviously opened the door to Thatcher. And then once Thatcher was in, she undertook a wholesale restructuring of the British socioeconomic model. I don't have the time to describe it here, but if you're going to understand Blairism, the third way properly, you need to understand the changes that Thatcherism wrought, because what it did was it contributed to a history of electoral failure. 79, well, you can read that. The point was, again, that Thatcher fundamentally reshaped British society, or Thatcher changed the weightings of class in the United Kingdom. It blurred the distinction between the upper class and the middle class, and it vastly expanded the middle class. Lots of working people who previously might have considered themselves to be working class became effectively middle class because of the massive expansion of capital owning that happened under Thatcher through privatisation of council houses and equity and the growth of the entrepreneurial economy. So we had significant change within British society, and it became evident to the Labour Party, particularly to that cabal sitting in the centre of it, the Blair, Brown, Mandelson cabal, that it was no good being a social democrat if you were never going to win an election. You can't achieve victory you can't achieve social reform from the backbenchers or from the opposition benches. And so they said, if we're going to achieve social reform, we need to reposition the Labour Party such that it will win elections. And so the third way was an attempt to square the successes of neoliberal conservatism with the principles of social democracy. That's probably the best way that I can put it. So again, we're going to go through this particular situation. We're going to look at human nature, and look at the way in which that feeds into society and the economy, and what that means for the state propping it all up. But all the way through this, what I want you to remember is that rather than being a sort of straightforward evolution of democratic socialism, this is in many ways an evolution of neoliberal conservatism, and its attempt to wrest the agenda back towards social democracy from the way in which neoliberal conservatism had just sort of undertaken this quantum leap in British ideological history. Okay, so our starting point then is the pros and cons of the neoliberal revolution. And once again, we're looking at this dualist position. We're saying, look, we've got benefits of capitalism, but there's a massive sort of exclusion cost if you are out of capitalism, and that's both on a sorry, I'm going to move this up here now. I hope no one's getting too seasick. There are costs associated with being excluded from capitalism. Those are borne both by the individual and by society. An individual outside of capitalism is having a pretty miserable existence. A society in which people are failing to benefit from capitalism is not a united society. It's not bound together as a Gemeinschaft, because we're not all on the same team. So neoliberalism had brought about tremendous change, tremendous economic growth, no doubt about that at all. But it had also led to the exclusion of some from this economic revolution, from the great capitalist merry-go-round. I often describe it as that. And so what we're looking at with neoliberalism is an attempt to try to square that circle. We've got benefits of capitalism, but we need to make sure that everybody can access capitalism. Because if some people aren't accessing capitalism, then life is going to be pretty unpleasant for them. So human nature. We're not changing anything radically here, or at least we're not changing anything radical from neoliberalism, or rather, excuse me, rewind. At face value, this looks a little bit like social democracy, in that we've got self-interest and we've got empathy. But again, what I want to do here is I want to show you how this relates to neoliberalism, because in neoliberalism we have pretty much entire self-interest. That's all we have. We just have self-interest that is driving this model through. Here we're saying, look, we're going to take that self-interest, we're going to have our self-interest, because that's basically the fundamental driver of economic growth. But here's the thing, we have empathy coming back into the equation. So we're taking the neoliberal self-interested model, that is individualist model, and we're adding back into that, we're feeding back into that empathy. And so we're saying, look, we have individuals who are self-interested, yes, but they are also empathetic, and they realize that if they are operating in an economy from in which the benefits are excluded, or some people are excluded from the benefits of that economy, then that's going to sit uncomfortably with us, because we are generally empathetic. So if we're having a fantastic time in this big capitalist society and we can see that others aren't, that is going to sit uncomfortably with us. And so we're seeing here a difference from the neoliberal conservatism and Blair's third way, in that if somebody isn't benefiting from capitalism in the neoliberal thing, it's because they're not working hard enough. And so this is your get on your bike conservatism. If you're not benefiting from capitalism, then there's something wrong with you. You're not working hard enough. You're not prepared to make the sacrifices, the concessions that have to be made in order to benefit from capitalism. And in the social in the third way, as practiced by Blair, what we're saying is, no, actually there may be reasons why that person is excluded from capitalism, and because of our empathy we can recognize that, and we want to change it, we want to help it. So we recognize self-interest, and we're very self-interested, and we're very, very driven, but we don't want to be in a society where there are winners and losers. We want to be in a society where there's winners and winners. And if there are winners and losers, then that's problematic for us, because we have this empathy, because we have this sense of empathy. We're not just going to get there by trampling over the broken bodies of our enemies. And throughout all of this, the sort of standard model that, or the standard sort of bellwether thing that you might think about is the single mother with a couple of kids of below school age, who urgently wants to work. She wants to get out there and she wants to work. She doesn't want to be a burden on society. She doesn't want to bring up her kids on welfare. She wants to be out there and she wants to be working, but she can't work because she can't afford childcare, and because the wages are not enough, and because it just doesn't work for her practically. There's nothing she can do differently because everything in this particular model is ranged against her. She can't access capitalism because she is looking after her kids. She's trying to feed her kids, and so she can't get out there and work. And of course, this could be a single parent as well, single dad as well. He'd be in exactly the same position if he can't get out there, and if he can't go out to work because he has to look after his children, and because that first rung on the ladder is not going to pay enough for him to get childcare or whatever it is, then we have a problem. And that basically is our sort of basic issue here. Right, so again, we have that balance of empathy and individualism. The distinction here being that we are embracing individualism to drive our economic model forward, but the empathy comes from recognizing that if somebody's missing out on that, then that's clearly not fair, and society is diminished thereby. Okay, so let's talk about that society. And again, here we need to see this in the context of Thatcherism and neoliberalism. Now, remember that everybody thinks about Thatcherism and society with that one quote, there's no such thing as society, individuals and their families. But of course, don't forget that Thatcher went on to say, there is a living tapestry of men and women, and the beauty of that tapestry depends upon the extent to which we are prepared to take responsibility for our own actions and thereafter help others. Now, that sounds to me an awful lot like society. And society is a critical feature of conservative thinking. However, it's a very specific type of society, and the conservative society tends to be a homogenous society, a society in which everyone is exhibiting the same sort of characteristics. And in the case of Mrs. Thatcher, and again, sweeping generalization here, but I'm going to come out with it anyway, that would generally be white, heterosexual, and Christian. So we were all God-fearing nuclear families, and of course, we're all capitalists. And so in this model, if we're all of the same stripe, then we're all going to be pulling in the same direction, and our society is going to be so much stronger for it. The idea being that diversity undermines society, difference makes society weaker. The similar we all are, the more robust that society is going to be. And you can see this by conservative positions on immigration, certainly on gay rights, and other such items of that stripe. So that's our conservative model. We have a social model, and economic policy. The idea we've all got to be good little capitalists. Now, Blair again is seeking to do a couple of things. He's seeking to reconcile individualism with empathy, and he is also at the same time trying to distinguish himself from the conservative model. And so what we have is this model whereby we recognize diversity. We say, okay, individualism is great, and we recognize that everybody's bringing something different to the table. So rather than enforcing this one shape on society, we reject all forms of heterogeny, and instead we emphasize the difference. We say, okay, let's embrace multiculturalism. Let's have our second sexual revolution, and we are rejecting those doctrinaire, ideological, and that ideological heterogeny. Homogeny that's imposed on society by neoliberalism, and instead we're celebrating individualism. But critically, while we're celebrating that individualism, we are also recognizing the community. We're recognizing that empathy. We're extending definitive rights. We're codifying rights, and we're saying, yes, everyone's different, but look, we've all got the same rights. We've all got equal moral worth. And yes, everyone's going to be a capitalist, but it's going to be an aspirational and responsible society rather than just aspirational. Well, wonderful quote there. You're sure you remember from Lord Mandelson, or Peter Mandelson as he was then. So what we're seeking to do is we're seeking to recognize the individual, but at the same time we're going to recognize that what we've got here is a community of equal, valuable individuals, each of whom brings something useful to the table. And we're going to look at building upon individual empathetic links to pull this society together. So rather than using identity to divide into an us and an other, what we're saying is we're all together. We're all in this. We're one big happy tent. If we're all different, then fundamentally aren't we all just the same? That explicit rejection of division, because again, we're socialists. We're not seeking to divide society. We're seeking to unite society through our common humanity. But it's a critical sense in which we are all different, therefore all the same. So unity and diversity is the social model, embracing multiculturalism, embracing the second sexual revolution, but stressing that we are all part of the same team. We have that sense of common shared identity that is codified in a system of rights. So essentially taking a mine shaft with a bit of Gazelle shaft in it. Again, Blair having his cake and eating it. So we have unity and diversity. That's our social model. Again, looking at all stemming from this duality. And then in the economy, it's essentially the same thing. Capitalism is great as long as you are a capitalist. So neoliberalism says, right, okay, if we unleash the individual will deliver economic growth. And the conservative model argued that we don't need to worry about anything else because a rising tide lifts all boats. Blair, on the other hand, said, no, that's not fair, because there are these people, this single parent, be them male or female, who's being left out because they just can't access the benefits of capitalism. Those who are below the poverty line, by definition, are not capitalists. They don't have any capital. They don't own the means of production. They're struggling, in fact, just to put food on their children's table. And so what we have is we take the neoliberalism, we take Thatcherite neoliberalism, and then we add to that social justice. Slightly confusing in that social justice in this sense is a sort of economic policy, but what it's saying is that from a social point of view, our economy should benefit everybody. Nobody should be excluded from the benefits of this economic growth. Everybody should have the capacity to be a capitalist. And so we have the three bellwethers, the three tentpole ones that I go for: Sure Start, tax credits, and minimum wage. Now remember our single parent earlier, he or she couldn't go out to work because they couldn't afford childcare. So we give them childcare. But then maybe we should say that you can't go out to work or they couldn't go to work because the bottom rung of the employment ladder was less than their benefits. Well, let's jack up that bottom rung by having minimum wage, and let's make sure that the harder they work, the more credit they get by giving them tax credits. So here we see three specific policies that are designed to deliver this level of to enable people to benefit from capitalism, to remove those institutional barriers that prevent the poor from getting on the capitalist merry-go-round. So the economic policy, that balance of neoliberalism to tap into individual dynamism, to get individual energies and what have you, animal spirits to drive the economy along, with social justice to make sure that the economy is benefiting everybody, not just the fabulously wealthy. So again, here we see this balance working all the way through, all stemming from that dualist position on human nature, the empathy with the individualism working all the way through. And it should be evident, of course, that here we have essentially an enabling state. We're back, if you will, to enabling liberalism, to developmental liberalism. So society, the idea is that we will allow individuals to flourish in society. We will allow individual expression. Again, look at the second sexual revolution. Look at the promotion of multiculturalism. But we'll also have massive support for social structures. We had huge spending on education and the NHS under Blair. And again, that what we're doing there is we're stressing those common factors that pull us all together. Even while we're celebrating diversity or indeed individualism, we still have that common sense of identity. None more so than perhaps the cool Britannia and the reform to education and the health, particularly the spending that was ploughed into education and the health system, the health service at that time. Another really, really important point here to stress is that Blair recognised that the state had become remote and, if you will, it become anachronistic. So Blair wanted to make sure that the state was modern, that it reflected a more modern society, that the state was a better agent of political engagement than what had gone before. So we're looking at reform. Well, all the reform things. Here we're looking at the way in which the state can reflect and assist society. So we're looking at the modernising state. We're looking at a state that supports individuals and the collective by being responsive and modern and receptive to ideas. Yeah, that lasted about as long as it took to invade Iraq, but never mind. Then on the economy, again, the state has your standard neoliberal macro position there to ensure economic stability, low interest rates, relative efficiency as far as possible, withdrawing of government support for inefficient businesses. But at the same time, again, critically enabling access to capitalism through the social justice policies that we discussed earlier. And I think I am done. That was about 20 minutes. Probably going to be a few questions off the back of that. I look forward to hearing them. Do please send them through. Do use this one in conjunction with the other videos, which got a lot more content on them. This is more about ideas. And I am going to sign out at that point because, yeah, I'm done. And thanks, everybody. Questions to the usual address. Look forward to speaking to you very, very soon. Take care now. Bye.